So yeah, if you're familiar with Hamlet,
Yeah.
in Act 1, Scene 3, he is confronted by the fact that his father was just murdered by his uncle, right? And then you would think Act 1, Scene 4, he would just like run to his uncle and kill him immediately, right? End of play. Except the whole thing is basically like him procrastinating, be like, well, can I believe this ghost? Even though he like absolutely knows, almost certainly, that that's what he should do. And maybe I kind of feel the same way. It's like I've identified a goal. I know exactly what I should be doing, but I haven't fully devoted myself for one reason or another to actually doing it.
Who's your ghost? Who tells you, who gives you the lead?
Death is the ghost. Are you afraid of dying?
I don't think so.
No? Why not?
I think it's a part of life. Is that not what makes life interesting, the fact that it's finite?
It could be one of the things that you could consider, making life interesting. It seems a bit extreme, though. Like, I think life is interesting enough that it doesn't need to be like, by the way, in about 60 years, you're going to die permanently, right? I think if it was like, in 60,000 years, you'll die permanently, I think I would still be just as motivated. I just think it's a bit of an extreme, sort of like, you'll be gone forever, and by the way, you're already about a third of the way up.
Okay, is it permanent?
Well, I guess it depends what you believe happens when you die.
Okay, what do you believe?
We're getting into pretty dicey territory pretty quickly.
You're holding a skull!
I don't know. And I think not enough people say, I don't know, to some of the big questions. They kind of confidently say they know this or they know that. So I think, first of all, it's good to just express humility. But what I do think is it's likely, probably the most likely, 60, 70%. It's like what it was like before you were born, forever into the past, kind of that, but forever into the future. Nietzsche had popularized actually a cool idea, which is eternal recurrence. So the opposite of nothingness is actually like infinityness. So, the universe, if it's infinite in space and time, it'll eventually repeat. And then eventually these exact circumstances will arise precisely the way they are here. And so what happens when you die is it doesn't feel like anything. A seemingly infinite amount of time passes, and then you're simply reborn into your exact same circumstance over and over and over and over again, which would not be good news for people who commit suicide.
So it's like Sisyphean suicide?
Yeah. Can you imagine? You're just like, all right, I'm going to struggle, and you're born into a body that you just hate, and then you're like, all right, well, at least I've got suicide as a way out.
Okay, so that's interesting, but then because it sounds like if it's repeating, we're predestined, but do you have that original choice at some point to commit suicide or not to? Like, if we're in this loop, when's the first choice happen?
Again, a lot of unknowns here.
Okay.
I do not, I'm not claiming whatsoever that I know. It just, in the same way that I'm uncertain, although I think it's most likely that it's just nothingness forever after you die, that seems to be the most probable, given what we know. Eternal recurrence seems like another probable one based on just like physics principles and stuff.
Okay.
And so I would not know. It's similar to asking why is there something rather than nothing, right? Like how did the whole thing begin in the first place? We don't know. Even the Big Bang, we know that it was all one finite point at some point, but we don't know why that happened or if there will be more in the future. So I profess ignorance.
Do we have to know?
No, and in fact, that's one of the things that I've kind of grown to have to try to accept more and more in my own life.
So when you said 60 years versus 60,000, with relativity, wouldn't it be the same? Like, if you live for 60,000 years, 1 year would be 1,000.
I see what you're getting at.
Like, wouldn't it be the same in the long run?
Okay, so then I would want to just speak in absolute terms. Okay. And I would just want to say 60,000 years expressed in the way that we understand 1 year to pass for us today.
Okay, yeah.
But I see what you're getting at a little bit, right? Because if you're born and you're told you have 60,000 to go, then suddenly every year feels like it goes more quickly, potentially. But no, I think 60,000 would still feel like a long time. And your worry then wouldn't be, man, when I'm 59,960, I'm going to get some disease that's going to kill me, right? Your worry is going to be, getting hit, by a car on the street or just accidents that will take you out before that. And probably we'd all be way more eco-conscious.
Well, that's the thing. You think if you live for 60,000 years, we'd have to drive as fast as we do?
No, there's this one. That's a really good point. There's a movie called. I totally forget what the name is, but Justin Timberlake is in it.
Yeah, with the watch.
With the watch, yeah. So they like find a way to get people to live longer, but it comes as a currency, right? And so the people who are really wealthy, not just in money but in time, right? Like on their wrist, it shows how much time they have left. And some people have accrued, thousands of years, and so they literally walk slowly, on the sidewalk. Because why do they have to walk quickly? It's a sign of luxury, right? It's a sort of pretentious vanity, show of vanity that way.
Do you ever get bored? Do you experience bored?
Yeah, but I think lately it's been more experiencing overwhelmedness, the opposite of boredom.
What does that mean?
So just being overwhelmed. So the feeling that there's just too much that looks for your attention, like too much that you need to pay attention to and too much that is important to pay attention to, and therefore the desire to have like less and less stimulus to the point of actually finding a sort of like equanimity with peace, which could be synonymous with boredom for somebody who sees it differently. Sorry, that was me just kind of...
No, I understand that. I think, yeah, we've all felt those phases. Like, is this a new phase? Have you been living this phase for a long time, short time? How long have you been in this?
Short time.
Yeah.
Short time. Yeah. No, it's new to me. No, and that's an interesting question about boredom, because like I'd often, when somebody would complain about boredom, I'd feel almost like ire, like anger at them. It's like, you're born. You're so lucky. Like, you have so much potential and so much. The universe is a miracle, and you can't seem to find a reason to want to do something that's worth doing. That at the time and for most of my life felt like the right way to think. I have way too many interests and hobbies and things that I want to do with my time. I can barely fit it all in.
Were you always like that, like from young age?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe more like grade 10, I kind of like really kicked it into high gear. Between grade 10 and 11, I had a bit of an epiphany personally.
What was that? You mind sharing?
Yeah, sure. Okay, actually, question for you.
Sure, yeah.
When did you first, when did the fact that you're going to die really first kind of hit you?
I was pretty late in life when I had close family members start dying.
Yeah.
So I didn't really experience death in like a tangible way for most of my life. And even then, through denial, through all these other things, it's been kind of very recent that I've acknowledged that in a real way. But then I kind of came to grips with it through studying like Stoicism, where you purposely look at that end date and you're aware of it every day and kind of using it as a motivation in that sense. But very new for me. Like, mortality's a new thing that I bothered to look at.
Mortality, it's coming up, spring 2024, fall collection or something. Yeah, so for me it was like in just kind of like, I had obviously had that moment, I think when maybe I was like in grade 5 or something, where like, or maybe it was earlier than that, grade 4, where like the idea that I was going to die one day kind of struck me. And I remember going to my parents' bedrooms and being like, wait a minute, they're going to die too. And they're going to die before me. And I remember just like crying in my mom's bed and then crying at my dad. And then it's like, wait, actually, no, that was what it was. It was like me realizing death was a thing. And then my parents were going to die. And then it was like, wait a minute, I'm going to die too. But anyway, so that was in grade 4. I didn't really think about much more than that. I was raised religious, but then I kind of like lost the religion. And then, grade 10, between grade 10 and 11, I was like smoking pot with my friends and stuff. And for whatever reason, just the circumstances, Wikipedia and YouTube videos, whatever, it kind of got me thinking more deeply about it. Like the real, actual, like emotional implications of the fact that we're going to die one day. Like in the same way that you wake up now and you're just like, wow, I am Mike of today. I'm no longer Mike of my 12-year-old self that was just, free running in the forest or whatever. You are going to just wake up one day and be like, and now here I am in a hospital bed and it's coming close to the end, right? Like that's just how it's going to work. And that's like an inescapable reality. Every moment that passes that is in your past is sort of like codified in stone, and you're inexorably moving forward toward, a final kind of, time where, and then after that it's like it could be just nothingness forever and ever and ever, and you never return to consciousness at all. Anyway, so that was the epiphany that I had, where I think as opposed to just the knowledge of that like sinking into my brain and me being able to regurgitate it, it was the actual like emotional understanding of what that actually means. And then I looked into all the philosophers, and I watched a 26-part lecture series on death, and I just kind of became obsessed with it. And then I resolved to doing everything that I possibly could in my lifetime. If I only have one lifetime, I might as well try. And it turns out, whoa, we're born in, the most technological and scientifically advanced age ever, where things are advancing very quickly, and I'm young now. I might even get to live to a point where we could use technology and science to find a way to make ourselves live longer, so we could at least push this thing back, think more about it. I know it's quite naive even looking back at it now, thinking myself about how I kind of thought about it at the time, but that's what I resolved to. And I resolved so strongly between grade 10 and 11 that I literally ditched all of my friends. And then grade 11 at the start of it, I just said, I'm going to put every ounce of energy and effort that I have into getting the best possible grades that I can get, so I can get the best scholarships, so I can get to the best labs, and just do the research that is necessary to make people live longer. And I've kind of been on that swing ever since.
Okay, that's amazing. It's a lot to unpack in that sense. I kind of want to back up a little bit, just kind of to 2 points. A, do you think drugs play an important part in kind of expanding our mental horizons? Do you think that's something that should be encouraged or not? Even just from a personal standpoint. If you would go back in time and tell yourself, would you have started earlier, later, done it, never done it?
Psychedelics, yes, because very low toxicity, very low addictiveness, and high potential for unique experiences. Obviously, some people's minds are in a place where we have to have compassion for people who struggle with mental health and who just wouldn't feel comfortable or safe allowing their mind to sort of be opened up to, completely different categories of horizon. I understand that. But I think for most people, experimenting with psychedelics should just be one of the things that you want to do at some point rather than another. Yeah, a bucket list item. Yeah, traveling to the world. It's kind of opening your mind up for sure. And they've done a number of studies into how psychedelics work in the brain, and I don't understand this myself super deeply. It's not my field, it's not my area, but the way I understand it is your mind is sort of generally on a similar stream of consciousness more often than not, right? This idea leads to that one, therefore I do this, therefore I do that, sort of routines that we put ourselves in, where psychedelics tend to allow connections between very disparate areas of the brain. And so therefore it can feel a little bit like you're, the ground is falling out underneath you, but in doing so you're connecting, ideas that you would never have connected before.
Wow. I'm a little envious that, even saying grade 11, grade 10, that you had a path and a goal. Was that kind of a unique experience with people around you on that same track? I don't know many people that knew what they wanted to do or pursue, a life goal or a vision or a vision for themselves, the world, especially that age. So what was that? Was that alien? You lost your friends. That was a choice? Was that just obsession?
That was absolutely a choice. Yeah. At that point, once I had made that decision and the profundity of how important it would be to pursue that was to me, I kind of just then quickly looked at my friends and I was like, oh, and I'm sorry to my old high school friends, but, they just were not going down that path to academics or anything like that at all. They were on a totally different sort of let's just be a little gangsters and do drugs and stuff kind of path.
Yeah.
And it was obvious to me hey, I've only got 2 more years of high school. When I go to university, I'll be able to just reinvent myself. I'll just get brand new sets of friends. These will become the people that I will actually, start the haven of scholars is what I imagined university was going to be. And so to me, it was just a prioritization. It was just a matter of just clean prioritization. And then to your question about most other people didn't have a sort of a clear defined path. I tried to convince other people. I think the way I got to mine was pretty straightforward. It was pretty obvious, right? It was listen, we're going to die. Technology is improving. There's a chance that if we commit ourselves to science and discover things and work on the engineering of biology, we could do something about this thing. And if we succeed, we might as well try. We'll have an interesting time doing it. And if we succeed, we'll be the captains of a brand new industry that will half rule the world. This seems pretty tantalizing to me. Does anybody want to join? And most people are just well, I'm not afraid of dying and I just want to do this. And you're stuck in your high school bubble, right?
Yeah.
So I think that was the fortunate part, was that I kind of burst through the bubble pretty quickly. And I think probably some people respected me just because they saw wow, he's suddenly getting amazing grades, and also he doesn't care, right? I just suddenly just didn't care about the high school popular kids or anything like that. It just didn't matter.
Did you eventually kind of find a group of colleagues or like-minded individuals that had your kind of passion or drive? Uh-oh.
Sort of. I would say like in undergrad, I was disappointed that it wasn't the haven of scholars. I really expected I'd be able to. I don't know why I thought this. My story. I'm realizing that my life story is just like a series of naive events where I just uncover that my previous thought, however excited I was about it, is actually unveiling to be like, oh, that's why that was naive, and here's your bubble being bursted a little bit more and a little bit more. Anyway, I expected I'd be able to go up to any student just walking around campus and be like, hey, you, what are you working on? Oh, geology, that's cool. Why'd you get into that? And they'd be like, well, because the igneous rock, blah, 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 and I want to try to find a way to get fossils to be, extracted from this process. And I'd be like, damn, that's cool. And I'd go to the next person. But I was sorely disappointed. I went to, the physics club, and they were planning trips to Canada's Wonderland, this theme park, in Toronto. And, I went to the biology club, and, most of the time they were deciding who's in the club and who's not in the club, and, what's the branding going to be, and, how do we do social media, and, not actually just the core biology or the core physics. Those people were kind of far and few between. I did, though, meet other students that worked on an emerging field called synthetic biology. At least that's what they call it. And I was drawn to it because it was like, hey, these are people who are deciding they want to work on these cool projects, engineering biology, to do brand new, interesting kind of things. That was so appealing to me. And so those what I would say were more like-minded people, but even they weren't really necessarily doing it because they were interested in extending our lifespans. That continued to be something that was even a niche within that field. And actually even a lot of them would disagree. A lot of them would have the sort of similar arguments that, you might have, which is, well, you need to die at one point, life is short and there's a reason for it, blah, blah, blah. It didn't really matter that we didn't agree philosophically on that stuff because they were people that were working on bioengineering techniques that I wanted to learn from them and work with them and develop together, whatever. As long as we were working on that, it kind of didn't really matter. And even to this day, even after having even started a startup in the space, I feel like the number of people who are fully committed to the logic that I feel everybody should be committed to, honestly, is still far and few between. You find them on Twitter. There's maybe 1,000, 2,000 people that are that level of committed to it.
How long before you were able to kind of specialize? Did you have to go through the whole undergrad program, biding your time? Were you able to focus studies towards longevity? Where?
I never really actually specialized, now that I think about it. I just got a degree in biology, but I spent, I picked courses that were in directions that I felt would be the most useful. For example, virology, the study of how we could use viruses to change genes in cells in your body. That'd be super cool. Or obviously immunology plays a big role, or developmental biology, how do you go from one cell to an entire organism? A lot of kind of secrets to unlock from that. So I specialized by deciding what to study, I think, more than, actually having a specialist degree. And I created a startup. I was doing the synthetic biology projects. Mm-hmm. And then after I did some of those projects, I created a startup. So I kind of made it my own. Yeah.
When was, what's that time frame? Were you a graduate? Were you?
It was the end of third year, the beginning of fourth year, at around that time.
What does a startup mean? How do you start a startup?
Nice.
What's a startup?
And to be clear, I did not expect to create a startup. I thought that I was just going to be go through undergrad, master's, PhD, just be a full academic this whole way through, because that's what it takes to discover brand new things in science, to make a difference to this ultimate goal. And so, but that whole time, obviously I'm thinking about stuff, right? I'm keeping my finger on the pulse. I'm thinking about ideas and how we use, genetic engineering and systems design to create new circuits. And, we came up with a number of cool projects together in the undergraduate years doing synthetic biology. And then an idea struck me. It just hit me. It was, I was actually, it's kind of a funny story. I was going through the freezer of a professor in his lab. Imagine a super old lab. This professor's sleepy all the time, and things are those old chemicals from the 70s and 80s just lying around all over the place, right? It's kind of and the freezer was even worse. And I remember there was a giant layer of frost, and I dug through it and I found an old sample from the 70s or 80s or something like that, which I thought was kind of cool. But then it occurred to me, if I'm going to be studying longevity for my whole life, it might be worth me taking some of my own cells and putting them there as well. right? And then this sleepy professor is just going to let them sit at the back of the frost in the freezer if it doesn't get cleaned out. And then 40 years from now, as a postgraduate, whatever, doing research, I'll get some of my own younger cells and I'll compare them to my old cells, right? And informationally, there might be some interesting insights that I could draw from there that would be personalized as well. But then I kind of kept going. I was like, wait a minute. Okay, if those cells are alive, if they're viable, then you could literally grow and divide out from that into like actual tissue or actual organs potentially even. That technology had just kind of started to be developed. And then it occurred to me, like, wait a minute, I actually want to do this. Like, I have to do, like, this is smart. I have to preserve some of my own young cells. This makes a lot of sense. So then I thought, okay, how would I actually do this? It's not actually sustainable for me to just go to every sleepy professor's freezer and hide it in the back. So I thought, okay, maybe there are 10,000 people that think like me. Somewhere in Silicon Valley, somewhere all over the sort of like, futurism on Reddit, kind of people that are thinking about the future and are excited by the future. I send a kit out to them. They send me back their cells. I put them in this freezer. Turns out cells are really small and you can get one big freezer. You split the cost amongst 10,000 people and then boom, 10,000 people have their young cells ready to go, preserved for when they're much older, for however we could use those. It just seemed like there's a lot that we could use those for. And now I've gone from being a scientist to being like, oh, okay, splitting costs. How does it cost to this? How do you actually get the kit out? How do you manufacture? Blah, blah, blah. And then that's how I realized, okay, this is a startup and it's something that I could put the rest of what I was doing on pause for because this, just makes sense to do now. So I should do it immediately.
Was there a profit model or was it just covering your costs? Was it like a scientific endeavor or a business endeavor?
It became a business endeavor. Yeah. It became clear that it was like there was the profit motive there for sure. At first, I really did just want it to be like as inexpensive as possible just so that people will all throw their cells into it, right? But then over time, it became more obvious that it needed to be more expensive and the whole process needed to be like certified and registered. And, we ended up going to Toronto and there's like a whole, set of freezers there that are like fully equipped and with like clean room systems and like giant microscopes to verify that the cells are actually valid before you go to freeze them. So yeah, it's become a lot more than just the simple idea that I had at the time, but now it's the kind of like proper version with actual profit motive and having raised venture capital as well.
And is it kind of an individual thing? Like, am I just looking for a bank to store my cells so I can have them later? Are you doing anything with them? Like, what's the...
So the company itself isn't doing anything with them. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. Like, they are continuing to do a ton of scientific research, like very high-end scientific research on like making sure that any laboratory or any company that would benefit from using these cells that are stored has the right protocols and has the right methods and has the right sort of, it's just as easy as possible for them to get that going and to get that, flowing. So there's a lot of like, taking samples from people, freezing them, thawing them, growing them, turning them into different cell types, developing the sort of like methods and characterizing exactly what each of that stuff looks like, and so that you can plug that into other laboratories, and those people will be encouraged to use our methods to grow more things from there.
Oh, so it's not only the customer with the cell, it's now you've got a feed of different laboratories that are, okay, so yeah, that's really cool.
Looking forward to the future, right? Because the whole point is like it's a speculation at the end of the day, right? You are freezing your cells in the case that, and it seems like a good case, it seems like a strong case that those cells will be very useful for you in the future, but it's still kind of incumbent on the company to try to do whatever we possibly can to make that as likely as possible. Although there's a whole corpus of obviously thousands of other labs that are working on technologies that are compatible with having your young cells stored.
So I've got a really dumb question.
Yeah.
So Walt Disney famously frozen.
Yeah.
But they froze him after he died, is my understanding. Cryogenic, he froze after he died. But let's say the technology exists where they could, I think he died of a heart attack. Would they have needed his younger cells to potentially grow a heart to put back into, like, could they do it with his old cells? Like, what's the cutoff, like in Walt Disney theoretical?
I'm going to go full conjecture here and full speculation with you. So first of all, what you're talking about is called cryonics as opposed to cryopreservation. And that is even more speculative. Like that is like substantially more speculative because there are fundamental connections that are being broken, within cells, between cells when you freeze things. The problem is that water creates these sort of ice crystals at the molecular level and it breaks things apart. It literally just causes cells to burst everywhere. And you can do things to ameliorate, to try to like get that to happen less and to make it, not as bad, but it still does happen. So to your question about the heart, there's so much uncertainty when you talk about the future, right? Because it's like 100 years from now, take him out of the ice, and what do we do with his body? I can think of a number of ways to get around the heart attack thing. So you could just chip off some cells from his shoulder and grow those. And if we're talking 100 years from now, by then I'm almost certain they'll have the ability to 3D bioprint a new heart, and then they replace the heart, and then they revive him.
Hypothetically, you know the day you're going to die.
Me?
Hypothetically, you know the day you're going to die.
Sure.
A year before that date, I come to you and say, hey, we can freeze you.
Yeah.
And potentially you might wake up. Would you sacrifice that year to potentially might wake up in 1,000 and live forever?
I would ask why a year? Like, why couldn't it be like, if we know my end date?
A day. How about a day?
Sure, a day. Yeah, for sure. I'd sacrifice a day. Yeah, absolutely I would. Yeah. Here's the thing: is what do you have to lose? It's either get buried and eaten by the worms, or at least there's some chance that something could happen. I'll take the chance that something could happen for sure.
What kind of energy does it take to say, because if you're preserving small samples, if I wanted to preserve a large mass, what kind of energy would that take? Like, what's the temperature it has to be stored at? What are the rules?
So liquid nitrogen is typically what's used. So that is like, the air is made up of something like 70% nitrogen. When you freeze that down, it is inert also as a sort of liquid. And it is down at negative 196 degrees Celsius. So that is super cold. And that's the temperature that you would take it down to. And then in terms of expense, yeah, it's an ongoing expense, and there are some people that have frozen just their heads, as an example, right? Like, again, if we're so advanced in the future, why not take some skin cells, grow them out into, like, the rest of your body, like, create a clone of you that just doesn't grow a head, and then just do a little, plug and play with the the frozen head, the new body, and then you kind of go from there. I know that sounds like I'm playing fast and loose with some of these kind of, like, I think, highly cherished, often viewed as, we have a certain, we care about human bodies. Like, even if you could just grow bodies and just kind of like use them for organs, the word's escaping me, like a sanctimony. We have a certain, we care. In the same way that, religious people care about the sort of like a church and it kind of being maintained. There's something that we care about with human bodies as well. But anyway, sorry. I just wanted to make like an ethical note here that like, while it is nice to think about these things scientifically and how it's like technically possible, everything that I'm saying, there's no laws of physics that limit us from doing it. I've grown more and more lately to appreciate the sort of like ethical considerations that, a lot of people would kind of push back on that for.
Okay. How do you view yourself as a conscious being? Is this you? Are you a brain controlling machine? What are you?
Wow, good question. How do I view myself as a conscious being? There's a number of layers to this. So the first layer is, what do I actually know for sure? The only thing that I can really actually for sure know is that I'm conscious. I can't even know that I have a hand. Not for sure. It's possible that I am a brain in a vat in some laboratory for some scientists being fed just the right signals like the Matrix, and being made to believe that I have a body that is shaped like this with hands that are like this, right? So, and I don't even know that you're conscious. You could just be a very convincing part of the simulation, like an advanced version of ChatGPT, where you are able to say all the right things that seem very conscious, but actually the only thing in the universe that's conscious is me. That is absolutely possible. So this is called solipsism. So, when you ask, who am I as a conscious being, I think at like the core, the only thing that I can know for sure is that part of it. I have gone beyond that, and I've accepted that like the world is too consistent and things have seemed to make a lot of sense over a long period of time. enough to the point where I'm like, okay, I immerse myself in this world and I accept this world, right? I don't just like disconnect entirely. And so, yeah, if we're accepting the sort of like physics of this universe and I am in this body, then yes, consciousness is an incredibly mysterious phenomena that emerges from the information processing of what is, collection of a trillion neurons in my brain that controls a body that came out of this incredible process, evolution, that led to this wild emergent complexity that is, the metazoans, the animals of the world, the sort of large scale complex things. Yeah. I know that kind of went all over the place, but I that kind of frames it well, I think.
I want to know why you whispered.
Oh, ChatGPT.
Why did you whisper it? Are our phones listening to this? Why is the whisper?
Well, everybody jokes that you should be polite to your AIs.
Okay.
I think we really should. No, I'm joking. I'm joking.
Well, wait, back that up before you give the real. Why wouldn't you be polite to it? Why would you not extend courtesy?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, it probably, even if we could do some sort of test and confirm that it absolutely was not conscious and it didn't care whatsoever, it would probably be bad for your own psychology to treat anything poorly, right? You should just aim to treat everything well. And if you accidentally don't treat something well, you should apologize for it. Yeah, so, sorry, the reason I whispered it is because I imagine that it's going to be a subject of conversation. So then I just wanted to drop it lightly, just in case that was your segue, but I'm happy to push it into later.
Oh, that's not a segue. The fascinating thing for me is I want to see what people get excited about. I want to see what, the filter of their experiences, because obviously you've got kind of a specialized view of the world through a lens that most of us might not even know exists. So every time I try to ask a question, I'm always interested in how does someone that looks at the world through a microscope or through history of how do they now approach a problem that we all see that we don't really understand? So that's why I'm just kind of curious. I just want to see where it goes. It's not about, your opinion is valid in the sense that it's your opinion, right? We can all have a million opinions, especially if we don't know. And isn't that kind of gets back to consciousness? Kind of gets back to light. We don't know, so I want to know how you feel about it.
I appreciate your view on that a lot, and I wish more people were just incredibly curious about other people and how they everybody has an interesting story to tell about how they make sense of the world.
Yeah.
No matter what, right? What do you think your purpose is? And, how do you make sense of the fact that you can't understand everything? And, you don't know a lot of things. And, what's the story you tell yourself? Whether they're religious or whether they're not, or whether they're, naturalists or, determinists, whatever. I agree. And I wish more people had that sort of inherent curiosity that you have to sort of say all right, anything you say is valid, no matter what. Literally, you're a human being existing in the universe. Even if you feel awkward and I'm not speaking properly or something, even that is we're documenting the psychology of a real being in the world doing their thing, responding to something like being in front of a camera, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, sorry, I share that appreciation.
But I like that too, because coming back to that idea of I can only confirm my consciousness. I think therefore I am is the only torch we can kind of carry through this wilderness of existence. But it's if we are in a simulation, if we are in the matrix, if we are whatever, a collection of molecules experiencing electricity, and this is the manifestation, I want to test the things around, you want to freeze water to see what happens. I want to talk to, if you aren't conscious, if I don't know,
yeah.
what answers will you give?
Yeah.
Not like a Turing test, but just is it all in my head? Because
yes.
if so, then everything you said is already in my head. What do I know? Are you my gatekeeper for,
Yeah.
with anyone? So it's such a cool.
I've often looked for the instruction set of the universe wherever it could be possibly offered, right? I started with Wikipedia when I was younger, in the sort of ancient philosophers, thinking about the things that we haven't made more progress on, right? We haven't made more progress on what happens when you die, really, other than physics and biology kind of instructing us further. And then you can look at literally this is a funny one, but like, you get electronics in a box, and in that box it comes with an instruction set. And that instruction set seems to have some pretty good conviction on what's going on. There's a part of me that just wants the instruction set to keep going. It's like, use this device for this and blah, blah, in these circumstances, blah, 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 blah. And by the way, the most ethical way to go on with your life is to do good for other people, and like you should spend some. It's like, I want to keep reading that. But
isn't that in the book that you turned your back on? Isn't that in the Bible?
Isn't
that in the Torah? Isn't that in the Quran? Aren't those the set of instructions that humanity leaves behind to say do good things for good people? Like, I understand there's negatives to it, but is that the concept, however misguided it might have been transformed or manipulated?
I think that's just it though. Like, you want to try to be as truthful as possible. Yeah. And like, hopefully everybody develops a pretty good, bullshit detector. And there are undeniably a lot of amazing things in the Bible, from a wisdom perspective and from a how do you live your life perspective. But it is highly inconsistent, and there's also a lot of not great things, like you mentioned. Yeah. And so it's absolutely not a comprehensive instruction set at all.
And apologies, I'm worried that sounded like an attack. When I said turned your back,
No.
It's like, I had religion. It was just the way I phrased it, but I meant no ill.
Be more aggressive if you want. It'll make it more interesting.
No, it's not about aggression. It's just more about understand. Like, what are the frameworks? Because if we could all read the same Wikipedia page, but if we all described it, it's going to be different. Yeah. We're all going to interpret or take different things and live our lives based on those things, but. I was thinking about this the other day. When we look at like the pyramids or ancient technology, saying how did they accomplish these things with this precision and these mathematics, and we can understand them, but we might not be able to reproduce them. How, like today, things are much more complicated, and I don't know if you could explain the internet as far as what it is, and then how each component goes in, and how, like, down to binary, down to electricity. Could we put that in a book in case we were wiped off the earth and someone could rebuild it? Like, is that possible to codify even the internet as a piece of knowledge to be preserved forever?
That's such a good question.
I demand you answer. You know the answer. I'm coming here because you know the answer.
I don't know the answer. So there's a similar project. I believe it's in Norway, like in northern Norway. They have access to some like permafrost or something where they've put a collection of seeds from a bunch of plants all together, right? It's kind of like preserve, like that version of knowledge I think is even more precious in a sense, because we'll never get the same evolutionary history and environmental history that led to the development of those seeds, and we depend on those seeds, right, like as humans. So there's a sort of selfish aspect to it too. In terms of the knowledge of like how to make everything, it may be actually similar, where even if you had the knowledge of like, how the internet works technically, like maybe that would speed up redevelopment if we were to go into some sort of doomsday scenario where, Mad Max, and we were back to the sort of basics, and we had to build our way back up through, advanced civilization. It might help expedite it, but I think there are like a bunch of foundations that kind of need to be laid on top of each other in like the world of atoms that go beyond just the world of like knowledge. Actually, David Deutsch, he's this physicist. I think he's a physicist, but he's got these kind of pretty extreme views on knowledge itself. Like if you just knew the right things to do, you could rule the universe. But you could literally do anything as long as you had the knowledge to do it. In the vacuum of space, you could, with the right knowledge, scoop up all the right hydrogen atoms, create a little 3D printer that creates another little 3D printer that like creates a habitable zone around you, and like suddenly you've got like a planet, like somehow, right? But it's an interesting question. I think it would still just be super difficult to rebuild from scratch just for these like atoms. Kind of, imagine the instruction is start by building a factory that creates iron, right? Like, and that's what you got as the instructions, to begin to even have iron so that you can have steel, so that you can have these materials, so you can have those materials. Like, it's still going to take you a lot of time and a lot of sort of like knowledge in the margins, like experiential knowledge to be able to get there.
What would happen if somehow I could contain the internet as it functions today in your phone? Like a standalone device that didn't rely on like Wi-Fi or signals, and the battery lasted forever.
Yeah.
If with that in your pocket, if somehow we could transport you to the year 1200,
yeah,
what would you do with it?
Hide it. the chances that you would just be branded a witch or something would be pretty high, and you would probably just be I mean you could even try to go to the king and just be like, listen, I've got this amazing thing, but like I think we underestimate just how different culturally people were, and how like I mean obviously in the sort of like in the best version of this experiment, like the phone is somehow tied to you, right? Otherwise,
only you can access it or turn it on, or it's invisible.
Only you understand English.
But it's essentially, or if you could go back with all the knowledge in your head.
Yeah.
So you could show people how to make steel if they were in the Bronze Age, or if you could understand how planets worked before Copernicus. Like, what would you use that as a...
Yeah, I would just do my best. If I wasn't going to be branded as like a wizard or a witch or something and like crucified for it, then and I was genuinely accepted, like Leonardo da Vinci would be a good example, right? Somebody who was far ahead of their time and who brought a lot of innovations forward. There would probably be the sort of like like imagine the person that did take you in that said like, oh, I'm not going to brand you a witch, I'm going to like take you into my inner circle and everything, but you could tell that they had like ulterior motives. You could tell that they like actually wanted to subjugate an entire group of people, and they wanted to like improve how well they could do slavery or something, and here you were telling them how to create better military equipment, right, essentially, so that they can increase their power, because that's what they want at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know, it'd actually be pretty tough to make the right choices and to make sure that the knowledge that you brought into the past could end up actually creating the best outcomes for people.
How would you rule the world today? It was up to you.
Yeah. Okay, so if you rule the entire world,
you're the president of the planet. We look up to you for leadership. You have, like, not in a dictator way, but you have say how we allocate resources or what things we're interested in. Where would you take Starship Earth? Where would you take it?
Nice. Okay, so first of all, if I was the lead, then we wouldn't need a military budget. And instead, so there's one interesting thing about the military budget, which is that like even if you took all that money and you reallocated it to just research or something, there is a certain like motivation to nationalism, right? Like tribalism is sort of like core to people's existences in a sense. And so obviously I would just try to like have all of that budget redirected into just science and engineering to like advance us as far as possible. I would have a project that is larger than, the amount that we invested into going to the moon, into, human longevity, right? Like just health in general, and health research and longevity research in particular. So I would try to have like a Manhattan Project style effort that way. And this isn't so popular. It's so funny. I see people talk about like us escaping the Earth and going to Mars and other planets and stuff as an escape, as, oh, the rich people, they don't want to trash the planet and then go somewhere else. Man, it's not going to be nice to go somewhere else for a long time, right? It's going to be like actual effort and hurt to like go to Mars and try to colonize it and actually live there for at least a few hundred years. It's not going to be great at all. But like, what else do we aspire to as a civilization? When you look at purpose for us as individuals, it's easier, I think, to try to get ourselves to live in the moment and to try to say like the moment is kind of important. I feel purposeful right now by explaining myself to you. If you and I both saw a child that was like mortally wounded on the street, we'd both be filled with purpose. We'd run outside and go help that kid, get him to a hospital, and make sure he's okay. But for society and for civilization as a whole, thinking about like what the purpose of our entire civilization is, that's a little more difficult, right? It's like, all right, survive. It's kind of Elon's thing, right? Get to Mars so we can back up consciousness. And that's good, but like, what are we striving for beyond that? Like, we just kind of survive and we get people out of poverty and we get everybody into opportunity. We all live in nice suburbs with nice homes and nice cars, and then what? We kind of just keep socializing. We just make more art, which is great. We should. But like, what are we, like, is there not a bigger thing to dream toward that we're kind of like aiming at? And so to me, the two big ones would be make ourselves live a lot longer and make ourselves a lot more intelligent. That one is a bit of a Pandora's box, because I could go on, but just very briefly, there are probably entire categories of feelings, of emotions, of like states of perception that aren't available to us that would be available to far more intelligent versions of ourselves. Like if you look at like, mice, they probably don't feel love, like love, the way that we do when, we're in the full throes of what love is. They're not even capable of it. And it's this wonderful, amazing emotion that depends on intelligence to be able to be there. And so there's no reason to think that there aren't more categories of amazing things like that go beyond anything we can imagine with more intelligence. So that to me is the sort of beyond the horizon purpose that I would aim the entirety of civilization toward.
What are some of the negatives or, I guess, pitfalls of living longer? Would you snap your finger, now we live 200 years, or would it have to be gradual for resource consumption? Could our society, if everyone doubled their lifespan tomorrow, would that be worse or better?
It'd be better.
Okay.
It'd be undeniably better. Retirement age would immediately have to be pushed up. So you have to imagine that these are now people that are being productive longer.
Yeah.
And people that, imagine if you could be 65, not retire, have all that experience and knowledge, and still have the able-bodiedness of a 30-year-old or a 25-year-old, right? That would be great for society, actually. Yeah. We would be able to create more resources. There are plenty of resources on Earth. Contrary to most people's opinion, we are not overpopulating. We are actually, the rate of increase in population peaked in 1968. Yeah. So the rate at which the population was increasing. The population is still increasing today, but at a much slower rate. And in fact, China, for example, is now starting to have an inverted population pyramid. You have way too many old people, not enough young people. So actually, I don't think it would be a problem at all. I think it would actually be a good thing.
How old or mature were you before you started listening to your elders?
I think grade 11, honestly, as soon as I
Yeah.
had that epiphany,
Yeah.
I started seeking out older people because they were, it seemed a little bit more kind of on my level, thinking about these things and wanting to talk about those things. So it's been since then, I think.
That's really cool. Yeah, I'm trying to sit down with my grandmother who's in her 90s, because sometimes when I talk to her on the phone, I'm like, what's death to you? What does it mean? How do you think about it when all these people are gone? What's it like to be a 90-year-old? And because in our states or our age, it's different. It's a different reality because you'd have to get sick or an accident.
Yeah.
But when you're looking close to 100,
it's right there.
It's a different thing. That's kind of a horizon. That's an edge we're not really looking over.
Something I heard on a podcast recently was somebody in their, I think, late 50s, early 60s. They said after you cross the halfway point, or what you assume is sort of a halfway point, you stop counting from when you were born and you start counting backward from when you presumably will around then die, which must be a totally different frame of mind. And as some of those thinkers ponder mortality itself and the sort of ever-present nature of it, it becomes even more present and even more alert for people. Maybe one bit of hope is there was a guy who highly wise in terms of Eastern philosophy, meditation, Buddhism, etc. He got a terminal cancer diagnosis, and for him, I think it's that he almost got hit by a bus, and he thought to himself, that would have been the actual shame, because imagine you get the cancer diagnosis, terminal, you have 6 months left to live. As soon as you leave, you get hit by a bus. That would suck, obviously, because you're dead sooner than you would otherwise have been. But it sucks even more because for him, that final 6 months, he felt the most alive than he had ever felt. He felt some of the greatest, euphoria because of that sort of sense of okay, every moment is super precious. So it would have been doubly tragic if he was hit by a bus at that point.
How do you feel about legacy? And I'm going to frame it in the sense of, let's say you don't achieve this goal to the level you think is possible in your lifetime. For whatever reason, you come to that point where you're I'm not going to get where I want to get.
Yeah.
Would you have someone take over this work? Are there other people doing similar things? Do you mentor people? How are you treating the legacy in that sense?
There's plenty of other people that are working on it.
Yeah.
So obviously I would try to put my lesson, whatever I learned forward if people wanted to learn about it from my perspective, or the ideas that I felt were kind of the best to move forward. I don't see why I wouldn't help other people to do that. But I think as, even now, kind of keeping my finger to the pulse on the progress of technology, it's been disappointing, honestly. It hasn't moved nearly as quickly or nearly as much as I kind of would have thought it would have. We have crazy advances in computer science that are just not nearly being met in biology. There are great things that are happening in biology, but it could be way cooler. It could be way more dramatic. Like, Jurassic Park kind of level stuff that we're just not doing at all. So I'm even already kind of becoming a little disillusioned. And, the mission isn't even really kind of hitting its stride yet. But yeah, I think at some point, I remember hearing somebody say that once they got another thinker, I forget who it was, but he was saying, if I ever get a terminal cancer diagnosis, I'm going to take up smoking right away, because that's a thing that this person enjoyed and that they withheld because they just enjoyed doing it. Mm-hmm. And so I think I would start to make some life choices differently as well. If it was clear that the goal wasn't going to be achieved, then I think I would just start to reprioritize to make the most of the years that I do have that are here.
Why do you think biology is not prioritized in the way some of the other science fields are? Is it just not as sexy? Is it not what's...
There's a lot of reasons. So biology is harder. It's a lot harder. It's weirdly complex. You change one, you think you understand a system, and then you're like, oh, if we just modify this part and take it out, then the whole thing will sing. It'll hum, and this person won't have that disease anymore. You take it out, and then it turns out that influenced this thing, and that influenced this thing. And not only that, now you've got these other mechanisms that come in and keep it going the way it was before, and it'll only work 12% of the time in 50% of people. And it's this level of chaos of the way that biology ended up being created. It's a miracle that we're sitting here calmly when we have 1 trillion cells that make up our body that are all operating on these chaotic emergent phenomena. So it's just way harder. It's way, way harder. That's why. We started to get hints, and the reason I'm disappointed is that we started to get hints, in 2001, 2003, Craig Venter shook the hand of Bill Clinton, the president at the time, and, they said, look, we sequenced the human genome. What an achievement. Cancer is around the corner. We're going to invest a lot of money. We literally know the code of life itself. Time to make a difference. Time to, really shake things up biologically. And here we are literally 20 years later, and, 23andMe is basically what we've got. We've got superficially being able to tell you this is the reason your eyes are this color, or here are the genes that contribute to the fact that you're taller, and here are a few very specific genes and modifications that you could have that give you an increased risk of breast cancer, an increased risk of this and that, whatever. And then it turns out that the advice is just exercise, have a better diet, sleep plenty, get social life, and don't have stress, right? Anyway, sorry. So it's not personalized, and it's not powerful, and it could be way more powerful. And I think more people in computer science are starting to wake up to the fact that they don't want to create, the third lawnmower sharing app. They want to use their powers actually for something beyond just making money and living in Silicon Valley, in San Francisco. They're starting to see that biology is this entire world that it would make a bigger difference if we made a dent in biology, because we are on that operating system.
I figured out why the lawn sharing app won't work. I've invested a lot of time into this, but everyone wants to cut their grass at the same time. Everyone wants a Saturday afternoon or something. No one wants it at 2 a.m. on a Thursday.
Well, then it's like timeshare. You just have cheaper times when it's raining. It's half the cost for the people that want to save some money. Or it could be a feature where everybody's at the same time. So you watch Joe do his lawn and then you hand it off. And everybody does it. And it's a community thing. You get together and you actually have a community bonding. It could be a feature, not a bug. Okay. Yeah, don't shoot down the lawnmower sharing apps, Mike. Come on.
I know. I was on board. I was planning it out. Hey, how do we wait? Okay, there's one big pitfall.
You do have a lot of competition, though.
So I'm an idiot. Where does biology intersect with chemistry and physics? Where is it in the sciences? What is it? I understand this is biology. I get that that's organic matter or tissue, but isn't it made up of the same things that are planets and stars and chemicals? What is it? I don't understand. I didn't pay attention in school. I failed science.
That's such a good way to ask it, actually.
What is it?
What is this substance that
What
we
is
call
it?
life? Ah, boy. So...
These are softballs. Just explain life, please. I need to know.
I literally laughed. It heard my ha ha ha, and it's literally saying ha 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 back at me. Okay, so... Here we go. Well, I'll try to explain it really briefly. So, from my understanding, again, I'm not an expert, although it is in my field. So, fundamentally, life is that which survives through mechanisms that allow information to get passed on generationally with little tweaks to that information so that it can change to match an environment. So what I just said there is kind of more like evolution, right? Like I think the definition of what life is and like, you know, the sort of like core features of evolution kind of have to go hand in hand. From a more tactile perspective, life is, you know, cells. Fundamentally, it's just these little, like, you can think of them as like spherical bags that contain all of these molecular mechanisms that interact with each other to keep the thing alive. So the major components are, you know, obviously you've got the membrane, the thing that kind of surrounds everything. You've got cytoplasm, this kind of like thicky fluid on the inside. And then in the center, and this is a general model, and in the center you've got DNA, and DNA is the sort of code. It is the thing that creates, that is the instructions, it's the information that says, here are the right little molecules to create. And it turns out proteins, you know, you go to the gym and you're like, oh, I need protein. You know, proteins are the workhorses. They are the things that actually like physically go off and do stuff. Right. So you've got the DNA, which is the information. It codes for these mechanical machines called proteins that go out and do stuff and build the cell. So it's kind of amazing because it's like information that creates the environment around itself to keep itself going. And that's kind of life, I think, at its corest, at its deepest essence there. Yeah.
Shitty question from like the, I don't know what you want to call it, the satirical side of my brain. But is evolution impeded by our prolonging of life through fail-safes? Like, are we...
Listen, man, we fucked around with evolution a long time ago. Yeah, it's not happening the way that it used to at all. Like, even look at our domestication of animals, right? Like, they're a brand new version of evolution. So for most of recorded evolutionary history, 3.6 billion years, 3.8 billion years, it's been natural selection, right? It's just what the environment says is most likely to survive is the thing that's going to keep going. And that's it, period. But then there has been artificial selection. We going in and saying, we like the look of this cow, we like the look of that sheep, and therefore, or this banana. And over time, it has literally changed to suit our preferences, which is kind of wild. Like, we've made a dent in the universe on Earth, not just through our carbon emissions and our buildings, but literally the life around us has started to mold and bend to suit what we have got going on, which is quite wild. So, okay, now I think you were trying to get at the question of, whether we ourselves, like as, you know, the sort of like human gene pool is evolving anymore?
Yeah, just in the sense of, you know, as like the giraffe with the longer neck or the longer tongue is going to have more leaves and it's going to propagate. Like the you know, adaptation to the environment like that. I'm approaching from the sense of, is it a mutation that just happened to be better suited, or are our bodies looking for new ways to be better? Like, is it an accident? What's evolution in that sense? Are we just always changing and some traits are good?
Yeah.
Or are we trying to change? Is our body trying to be better? Or
so fundamentally, between generations, it is always creating little mutations that create slightly different versions of what the parents were. That is just like a fundamental. But then it's the question of what children are selected for. Which offspring do you say this one versus this one? And what's the mechanism that's choosing? I described to you natural selection, the environment choosing, and then artificial selection, humans choosing. But then for humans ourselves, who's choosing anymore? Is it natural selection? Are humans choosing other humans? We don't have like an Adolf Hitler at the peak of the world being like, and you live and you don't, and you live and you don't, because we're trying to move humans this way, right? That is absolutely not happening. Instead, what's happening is superficiality. It's people deciding based on, they say men are turned on by their eyes and women are turned on by their ears. So it's like we've just you would hope that we would have much more sophisticated ways of like selecting mates, and for society deciding on which people it makes. Everybody should have the right to have kids, obviously, but inevitably not everybody does. And so then the question of human evolution is really just like who succeeds in creating the most children, and therefore their traits will end up getting passed on the most. So you have to have, successful mating, you have to be able to mate with somebody, and successful child rearing, right? Successfully getting your children to actually live and thrive. And so then that's a more complex question now, but like, what are the peacock feathers of humanity, right? Like, what are the traits in men and what are the traits in women that make that most likely? And why are those traits being selected for? A lot of it is superficial. A lot of it is just, here's what I learned, here's what I was told, therefore I go after this kind of person, and society supports those kinds of people. But that's a whole psychological web that we could unfurl.
Yeah, are we as like, if there's just a sample size of 100 people, and we're all in this room, and we're deciding on what shirt we're all gonna wear, right? Like, when we scale it up, like those desirable traits or qualities, are those groupthink, or is that like a marketing agent manipulating our thoughts based on our animal reactions to stimuli?
You know what? When people put things on marketing agencies and say that like, the diamond ring, for example, was invented as a thing we proposed with an expensive diamond ring. That was an invented concept by some marketing agency. Can you imagine how good that marketing agency feels that they are being given the credit for this entire idea and that it worked that well? Like, are these people like crazy hyper geniuses, like on the level of Einstein, that they literally changed the entirety of Western? So I don't think so.
Okay.
Partially. You cannot get people to behave in ways that don't already hum or align with some underlying physiology, some underlying psychology that was already kind of there. And I think smart marketers will recognize, right? They say sex sells, right? They figure out the things that you're already kind of aiming toward, and then here's the product, here's the thing your mind is already kind of going for. Let's find a way to like align those as well as possible to make our product sell.
So they're amplifying a signal. We're getting much more of the drug that we already want.
Audience capture. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So
that means then, I guess it could be anyone. So if I identify the trait, the quality, or the resource that people find attractive, I can essentially select who I want. Like, if you're attracted to people with long hair, I can say like, okay, I'll just get long hair.
That's right, yeah.
And then
you got it.
You got it.
Fortunately or unfortunately, it's way more complex than that. Like, probably most people could find a mate almost immediately if they wanted to. It's just that they would have to like lower their standards and expectations substantially, right? And then so then it's now a question
like
of
all of my exes.
all of my exes too. No, I'm not married. Yeah, and then there's so it's like. So then it becomes more a question of like a desire to have like access to a sort of like better mate selection, and that all of this has become a luxury, right? At this point, it's not like you need that. It's just a luxury.
So with kind of mapping of our DNA, just kind of with like I don't know what they're called. Like the genetic. I don't know if they're diseases, defects that can like skip generations, or you can carry them or pass them on. Should that be a thing that maybe if I'm deciding to have a child with someone, should we both put our card on the table to see like, hey, is this a good idea? Do we match? Will this impact life we create negatively with some incurable disease? Or
except for a few diseases, genetic diseases, We don't actually understand it well enough
Okay.
to know whether that would happen. Yeah, there are some that I'm pretty sure you can, and it's probably a growing list. I'm not like fully up to date on it, but it's not as thorough as you might think,
Okay.
which is part of why I'm disappointed. I would expect that it would be way more thorough. And in fact, there was a movie called Gattaca, pretty sure it came out in 1997 or 1999, where that kind of future, was being shown kind of on the big screen. And, it went further than that. The parents would consult the genetic counselor, and they wouldn't just say, right, and they'd say, I want these traits and I don't want those traits, and go ahead and, produce that for me. So as opposed to just making sure you don't get bad things, it's like we want the good things.
So if you manage to crack some sort of code for longevity where you can flip a switch, where it's not just eat healthy, get exercise, reduce bad stresses. If there's a switch that you find that you can turn on with a chemical or a needle, how does that get introduced to a population? Is that for everyone? Would I have to buy it? Who controls it? What's the world like if you discover this tomorrow?
Well, first of all, be my friend now, because I'll get you a discount in the future. No.
Thank you.
That's funny. There's so many open questions here. I cannot pretend to know totally how that would work. What I would hope is that it can be as democratic as possible, right? The people that want it can have it. But I also really respect OpenAI and their approach to introducing something as potentially societally transforming as something that is flirting on general artificial intelligence. And so I think you'd want to have you'd want to allow people to have societal conversations about it and ethical conversations and take time to make those decisions really properly, because I can totally see a botched rollout where it's like, we got it and it's just as cheap and accessible as the COVID vaccine, and in fact we're trying to get everybody to get it, and then there's conspiracy theorists and then people push back, and then it's unnatural and the sacred human body and all of this stuff will kind of push back against it, and it could create a big rift. So yeah, these are really just me kind of thinking out loud, honestly. But yeah, I would hope that it's not super expensive. And even if it is, I would take, a $2 million mortgage on the fact that I'm going to be able to pay that off over the next 60 years because I'm going to live another 600, right? Sure, yeah. I don't know. It seems to make sense as long as I'm going to continue to be productive.
In your view of it or understanding of it, is, say, general AI or ChatGPT or whatever, mid-journeys, these AI programs, are they intelligence or are they just a faster calculator? Is this the difference between an abacus and an electric calculator or a computer? Is this just the next step, or is it something kind of unique?
It's a bit of both, maybe.
Okay.
We can constrain it to be an advanced abacus, and that's kind of what it is right now. That's how people are using ChatGPT. But I think, the question of whether it's intelligent, it depends on your definition of intelligence. Intelligence is, your ability to swiftly meet your goals, or to have actions in the world such that your goals can be met. With advanced versions of ChatGPT that are already coming out, Auto GPT and these other things, right? The more access you give it to resources, the longer the arc of the goal is that you can give it. Right now, a calculator, it's goal, calculate this number, enter, boom, goal achieved. Intelligence. And then ChatGPT, it's describe what it would be like to create a cat-dog chimera and tell me what experiments I should do to kind of get there. Okay, here's how you do that. Goal achieved. I've explained to Stephen how to do that. But now a future version of AGI, which is create the dog-cat chimera. It's okay, and then it'll come back at me and it'll say, how much money do you have? And I'll say, okay, here's $1 million. And it'll say, I need $1.5 million. And then you'll say, okay, here's $1.5 million. And then it literally just okay, give me 2 months. It starts a company, it raises money, it hires the right scientists, it does the right experiments, it conducts this entire thing, and you actually get a dog-cat chimera. So the arc of the goals, I think, is kind of how you could differentiate the sort of calculator from an AGI.
At what point are super rich or super powerful people going to decide that this shouldn't be like a democratic tool? At what point is this too powerful for everyone other than you to have?
I don't buy into that. I don't know. I'm just not conspiratorially minded that way. So like, the wealthy are just not. They're wealthy almost mostly because they like have come into it, not because they are so sophisticated and so coordinated that they're doing an amazing job at keeping everybody down. There probably are some systems that have been developed, probably partially incidentally, that do actually have that effect, where it's like a concentration of capital at the top that doesn't make it to everybody. But my view is not. In general, I don't like look at Elon with Tesla. Like obviously, gas and oil interests would rather not have everybody moving to electric cars, and yet it's happening at breakneck speed, and like everything's going in that direction, right? So I don't know. With the distribution of power, maybe some people will push back a little bit, but it's just the cat's out of the bag. I think you just have too much upward mobility. Like the programmers who are smart, who come from lower middle class, can become more powerful in a matter of years because they're actually fingers on the pulse in the fast moving world, as opposed to somebody who's just sitting in their castle being like, oh, I don't want that to happen, right? Like they're going to, if they're not staying on top of it, if they're not providing value for everyone else, then they'll be out as well.
Yeah, it's just the reason I asked it that way is I was kind of looking at it as if I had a box that could make money, or a box that I could put on the ground and say, start a company, hire, and give me this result. That's what, like, I'm looking at it more as like, this is a box that can make money.
That's a good point. And I mean, to be fair, I did say that the AI would have to come back to me and say, how much money do you have?
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to set it off on a goal and have it achieve that goal by starting out by making money in order to have enough money to do the goal. But it's another thing for it to...
It's so resource, like it doesn't have to be money. It's like, give me enough electricity, give me enough sub-zero temperature, give me enough sunlight. Like,
but like...
Eat something.
Yeah, but like now it's like, imagine it's telling you like, go and step on a bicycle to like create the electricity that I need in order to get this to go, right? Like money would just be the easiest way to get all of that to happen. Because especially digitally, because you can just pay this person, pay that, and it's efficient. As opposed to just being like, human, you are the physical incarnation of me. Go off and do these things if you want this goal to be achieved.
Do you think tech is kind of a new religion or a new, not deity, a new regime, a new monarchy? Like, is tech this thing that came out that we thought was innocuous or fun, like it's now like taken over the world? Like, is it becoming the new reality? Are they just companies? Are they a way of life? Are they a societal shift? Like, what is it versus when you were aware of the internet or when you were aware of Wikipedia? How far has it come, and what is it? What does it mean to you as a global citizen, as an individual?
That is such an interesting framing. So something probably wonderful happens to most people when they walk into the Sistine Chapel, or even just like you see it on the horizon. You're like walking, you approach it, and then you actually like see the grandeur of it. You walk through the door, you get this smell, there's other people, it's suddenly like quiet. It feels like a sacred place. You look up and you see the beauty of art and what that art is aiming to represent, which is this grand set of mysteries, this sense of epic largeness that is far larger than anything in your petty life. And I think that's part of what made religion successful. Right? It was this sort of like getting to touch or getting to be participating in this, epic, grander thing than you. And technology, so Nietzsche had a lot to say about this. God is dead and we have killed him, and that's going to leave this void. And I think most people in Silicon Valley are atheists or agnostic. And for them, as I was saying, there's this sort of like, okay, yeah, we can create all this technology, we can create all this potential, but what for? And I think that's why Elon has the position that he does, is because he's got a what for. In the latest video that SpaceX released on Starship's destination, Mars, they literally had a view of the astronauts coming out, the doors open. And it wasn't just a barren Mars. It was a Mars that was already kind of growing and inhabited with cool things going on, right? That gives people this sense of like the Sistine Chapel, right? There's something grand, there's something amazing out there to look forward to that is going to be bigger than all of us, that is something to strive for and to aim for. And for the humans that kind of need that, where religion used to fill that, now it's seeming like we've taken the wisdom from religion, the great things from religion, we've put it into a more sort of like secular humanist view. Ideally, we take some things from Eastern philosophy and we can live, well and have these goals that we decide for ourselves that are hopefully fruitful, yeah.
What if I can help in any way through myself or through trying to, again, part of this experiment is to meet people that are doing cool things. If I were, like, how can I help you achieve your goals? Like, what can I do something? If I meet someone that is a specialist in this, can I connect you? Like, how, like, what can I do?
That's a good question. And it'll, like, you're already doing part of it, I would say, right? Like, by capturing me saying all these things, and then who knows where that goes. But you capture people's imaginations. Like, you're already really good at doing that. And if what I'm saying is tantalizing to you, then tantalize other people. Get other people excited by it. I think maybe one of the things that makes biology less interesting to some of the smart people is that the lifestyle seems far less superior than the sort of like, I become a computer engineer, I go work at Google and sit on beanbag chairs on my laptop, and that's good enough. Like, it's like an appealing kind of work to do. Whereas the biology work that needs to get done is, it's like laboratories. You put on a lab coat and you're like pipetting stuff and you're physically, moving instruments around, and like it's different. It's sophisticated, but it's different. But I feel like if those environments would be filled not just with people that are there because like, oh, I kind of like biology a little better in high school, therefore I kind of just landed here and I did my degree in biology because I kind of kept going, and now here I am on my master's and I'm still just going. If there could be a sort of like corpus of work that got people as enthralled and as excited about the sort of like biology direction as people are getting excited in the sort of space direction, then yeah, but this is a large vision, right? Like, I don't know what that would look like a video series or like one amazing movie that kind of like gets people, just hyped around this concept, that puts it in the public consciousness in a brand new kind of way. That is, I think, probably how, people who capture stories and share it with other people would be best suited to help. But I mean, I could think of more things.
Well, how would you capture, say, like the imagination of like that 5th grade class that's dissecting that onion under the microscope the first time? The first time they're looking into learning about the mitochondria. Like,
yeah.
How like, what would you say to them if you would you look for the people that were interested? Would you address everyone? Like, well, how would you inspire someone to pursue it? That maybe there's a lackluster teacher, but like, how would you? If you could be in every classroom, how would you inspire? How to
inspire? That's so good. You got to paint a picture of the future that is amazing, that is really tantalizing. Do you remember the Jetsons? Mm-hmm. What happened to the Jetsons? Like, I think the Jetsons were like the only, very positive about the future kind of like show for young people that made them feel like, I want a future with spaceships and like, robots in the environment and like, all sorts of gadgets and stuff that is going to be cool and interesting. I think the future is going to be a way more nuanced version of that. Like, nobody really wants flying cars. I think people just want to get from A to B, more quickly. And like, the role of human connection is becoming more important. It's so hard to say. It's just like, I guess the way I see it, like, the only thing that I could think of is what excites me. Like, why do I get excited? It's not just that there's longevity and therefore you might not have to die and therefore we could like go on to this amazing future where we like play with intelligence and become, like, that's not going to be that tantalizing to a lot of people, or people are going to find reasons that that's just not jiving with them. Hopefully that jives with them and then they're good to go. You just go. But for other people, I think, like, why are people attracted to computer science? It's because of lifestyle. So I think having more companies, maybe you have to start there, where it's like, look, the people that are seeing biology as a platform to engineer on are creating these amazing, creatures, first of all, like bacteria that will solve climate change. And, maybe even like, there's so many ideas for so many cool things that could happen in biology. Like, imagine we could like modify fruit fly genetics well enough that you could just like leave a bowl of sugar out on the corner. Fruit flies would breed. You literally get hundreds of them, and then because of the way they're engineered, you like clap twice, and then they like all get up at the same time, and they start orbiting over your head and just like flying in a whole circle. And then wherever you walk, they just literally just follow you, and you could point at somebody, and they'd go and like pestle the person, or I don't know, whatever. You could have like fruit flies under your control potentially. So this is
You're inspiring supervillains.
I think that's like part of it though. You have to like show people the power. You have to show people the like potential. Like behavior control in animals is a thing that is like nowhere near being figured out. But if we did figure it out, that's the kind of crazy thing that like imagine a cat that when you're gone, it like didn't just want to sit around and lounge around. It likes to like pick dust up from the corners of your apartment and put it all into one neat little pile, and then would stand beside that pile when you got home. And you can be proud of your little cat, and you clean up the dirt and put it away. Or even more. Anyway, I think science fiction is science vision. That's what I think would be necessary, and people being okay with using their imagination to see just how far we could take biology, not just in helping us clean up the world or create better biodiversity or just keep the biodiversity that we have, because people care about that a lot, but also for its own sake to play with, and like then for ourselves as well, our own bodies, and just seeing that potential. But yeah, I don't know. The only thing I can lean back on is the things that excite me. But then even then, I just know those things don't excite everybody. Mm-hmm. So I don't know.
Does it take, if you couldn't do what you're doing, if you couldn't follow this path, what would you have done? What would have been the next thing that would have taken your attention and your thoughts and your philosophies?
So I would meditate until basically play the cards, like be as healthy and meditative and stress free and just like chill as possible, so that it's like the most likely that I'll live as long as possible, so that I can catch the tail end of what other people are working on. That's if I couldn't participate myself, if I couldn't try to help what's going on. But I think you're actually asking if I didn't have this mission, if I didn't want to do.
Would there have been a follow-up? Would you have been aimless? Like how do you picture your life? Let's just say for some reason you ever caught that bug. Where would you be today if in grade 11 you didn't realize you were going to die one day?
Probably just still in Kingston. So Kingston is where I went to high school. It's a city between Ontario and Toronto in Ontario, Canada. I really don't know. I probably would have just like, I think I was like still decently smart, and I could probably like, find some gig that was like, it's good, and like, I don't know. Yeah, it would not be out there at all. I would not be putting the pressure that I'm putting on myself now at all. It would be more just hang out with the friends that I have, and like probably go after, trying to find a girl and like have kids, like just the normal thing. I think it's really hard to say, honestly.
Final question.
Yeah.
Just kind of piggybacking on that answer. Are you missing out on that life experience because you're trying to make your life longer? What are you sacrificing?
Yeah, that is a really good question. There's this predicament that happens in philosophy that I've noticed, where you can have philosophers that spend a lot of time and energy studying like the ethics of good versus evil and how people should behave, and what's the definition of justice, and like even further to like what should you be doing with your attention and time, and like we're going to die one day, what about existentialism and ontology and all these things. And then at the end of the day, some of the wisest things that come out of that thinking are to be in the moment, are to be as present as possible. And I've had these moments where I'm like struggling with like just overthinking philosophically basically everything, and I'm just like taking a walk or something, and then I see a family that's like at a park, and it may be that they haven't thought about Nietzsche for years, since they like last studied it, and whatever, the parents and the children have never heard of this, and they are just so fully immersed in just being a family with their little struggles. Sorry, I shouldn't say little, with their struggles and with their the things that they've got going on in their like immediate presence. And like I have a certain sense of like envy a little bit, where it's like I could sit here and be like, listen, I've gotten up to my philosophical pedestal, and like I have thought about all the stuff that you've never thought about, but it turns out that after all the thinking I've done, I'd kind of rather just be where you are. So that's one interesting insight there. Yeah, it would be the greatest dramatic irony ever if I like super sacrificed just all of my time and all of my life to. But I think, as it turns out, like doing interesting things and like being onto interesting things makes your life more interesting, and therefore, like you can kind of have a bit of both. It's like you don't have to just sacrifice one for the other. That's kind of what I thought when I first got into university. They would like, I have to devote 100% of my. But I live in a human body, and human bodies, as it turns out, need social lives and like romance and all this other stuff, right? So I have been fortunate enough that in my efforts to achieve longevity, it has resulted in a more interesting life for me anyway, that has been more fulfilling and satisfying, I think, than if I had just kind of not and just been more, quote unquote, normal.
I think you're normal. What do you mean?
If I had less,
Normal means boring. I can decode that.
No, not even. It's perfectly great, and it's the human condition is to have that experience, and that is the thing that we're like coded to do. And so I respect that, and I don't see it as a bad thing. But it would not be this. It wouldn't be different. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you so much for this. This is really, really awesome. I appreciate it.
Of course, I appreciate your questions. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Stephen.